Hello everyone, this is Ohio Dan. I wanted to make a video where I tie a concept or a thought experiment that I've discussed several times before now to explaining why it is that I think that the men's rights movement has pretty much failed to achieve any of their goals over the past couple of decades or longer. And I guess you could argue that the men's rights movement's still trying, that they're still trying to emphasize men's issues as being important. But the reality is that feminism is pretty much won, that feminism is becoming more and more extreme instead of more and more willing to be reasonable, that we have an anti-male society probably now more than ever, that level of being against men and just blaming men for all the problems in the world just continues to increase. And we're probably worse off now in that regard than we were even a few years ago. Everything is just about men are bad, men need to do better, women can do anything men can do, but men need to do this to prove themselves, and so on and so forth. And I want to explore why it is that the men's movement has failed using what I've called the PETA principle. The PETA principle is just my attempt to explain, using a kind of extreme hypothetical example, why it is that human nature just can't support something like the men's rights movement, why human nature will not allow compassion for men for the most part, beyond just the biological origin. And there's a raging debate going on about this, about whether gynocentrism is based on biology or just based on social constructs, but it really doesn't matter here. And so the idea goes like this. If you have a community of people that has been raised for generations to not care about animal welfare, it's okay to abuse animals, it's okay to torture animals, it's okay to neglect them, not feed them. If it's your property, you can do whatever you want to them, and it's no one else's business. And if there are stray animals or wild animals on the streets, unless you're trying to preserve those animals as a resource, those animals themselves don't have the right to live just for their own sake. So you can just do whatever you want to them. And there are no rights whatsoever in terms of seeing animals as their own entities that deserve to live for their own sake. They're just a resource. You don't have to care about them. You can just do whatever horrible things you want, and they're just animals. They don't deserve to have rights. If people were taught for generations in a particular community that that is the case, that that's how animals deserve to be looked upon, and you tried to go into that community and get them to join an animal welfare organization like PETA, how well do you think that would go for you? Do you think you get people in droves to want to join PETA? Or do you think at best they would laugh at you, and at worst they would be violent toward you and actually run you out of town? That's the type of thing that I'm talking about, where people just don't relate to new concepts based on compassion and empathy. Or they don't just change their thinking on that basis, might be a better way of putting it. People do things based pretty much on how they've been programmed to think. Sure, you have exceptional people for one reason or another who have come to recognize that, oh, wait a second, maybe in this example I'm using, animals do deserve the right to live just for their own sake. Maybe they have a point because I'm actually thinking as an independent, morally cognizant individual. Sure, you'll have a few people that will do that, but they're going to be few and far between, maybe 1 out of 100 at best. Most people are just going to say, you're challenging what I've been taught to believe in my whole life, so now I'm going to come after you regardless of the facts, regardless of the information that you're putting out there, regardless of you probably having the moral high ground. Just doesn't matter. That's not what I've been taught, so I'm going to oppose it. That's where things stand, in my opinion, when it comes to how society views men. Society has been taught, and I'm talking about the Western world and most of the world in general, frankly, but especially modern Western countries, the United States, the UK, Canada, Australia. They have been taught for generations, people have, that men are to blame for all the things that are going wrong in the world, that men can never do anything right, that Men don't deserve to have their issues looked at because we need to do more for women. And the thing about that is the facts, and I've discussed this before as well, the facts are completely 100% on the side of the men's rights advocates, really, in terms of them versus the feminists or them versus the women's rights advocates. Look at the family courts and what they do. Look at the domestic violence laws. Men have no recourse in cases of domestic violence. Men have no reproductive rights. You can't legitimately compare homelessness, suicide, and not having access to your own children, which greatly affect men more often than women, versus the wage gap myth, which has been proven to be a myth time and time again because it's an apples to oranges comparison. Manspreading, mansplaining, so-called rape culture, even though you're seeing men continuously get exonerated based on false rape charges. Me Too, where men have no due process rights in the workplace. You can look at all these different examples, like I just have pretty much, and see that women definitely have so many advantages over men. Men are getting the short end of the stick with so many different things. You can talk about affirmative action programs. You can talk about that in college and in the workplace environment as well, with diversity hiring. Women are taking advantage of the system so much, and they have so many advantages over men, and yet no one cares, right? The facts and the information are out there. The MRAs have been trying to put the information out there for what it is for decades, and no one freaking cares because no one cares about men from the beginning, from the starting point. And so you're not going to just convince people that they need to start caring about men now based on compassion and empathy. Just like you're not going to go into the community of people that's been taught that you don't need to care about animals and get them to join PETA. You're not going to get people to start caring about men just because you tell them that's what they ought to do and you just present a bunch of facts and information that clearly shows that you're in the right, but they don't care because men don't matter to them. The only way that there's any chance at all for society to start treating men better is not by advocacy in any direct sense. It's by men withdrawing from the system, not getting married, not having kids in this environment, not giving women legal authority over them in any way, not allowing women to treat them poorly as a utility object without any sort of reciprocity. Men just refusing to get taken advantage of and being used. If men do that in large enough numbers, now you have the ability to force change. Because with the example that I use with PETA, if you can start fining people or throwing them in jail for abusing animals, and you have the power to do that, they're going to resist you. They're going to be pissed off. They're going to want to go against you. But if you frankly have the power to do that to them, within a few generations, those people will start caring about animal rights because now you are affecting their everyday life and you're basically forcing the issue. Now, when I say force the issue, when it comes to men's legitimate problems in society, I'm not talking about violence. I'm not talking about forcing women into anything. I'm not talking about trying to directly change the system. I'm saying that you just quit. You take your ball, you go home, and you stop playing a rigged game. That is what men have the ability to do. That's the other side of the coin with what I'm talking about with the PETA principle. Animals don't have the ability to rationally make those decisions that they're just going to quit and they're going to wander off and not deal with people anymore. But men can decide that they're not going to be part of a system that's going to try to exploit them, at least to a large degree. Men can decide to opt out of this bad arrangement instead of trying to continue to work within the system because, again, nobody cares about men. And just as a last point here, you, of course, can go back and cite historical examples, even in recent history with the LGBT movement. Well, no one cared about gay issues, Dan, or very few people cared about civil rights in terms of how it affected black people and other ethnic groups. So why can't we have the same awakening for men and men's issues? The difference is the powers that be decided that they could care about those issues. They decided they wanted to support LGBT causes. They decided that they wanted to support the civil rights movement and feminism as well. The powers that be decided that it was to their advantage to change how people viewed these issues in society. Some cases for the better, some cases not for the better. I'm not going to argue about any of those particular movements here because that's beyond the scope of what I'm trying to say. But ultimately, people that had authority and influence over the education system, over the media, over the way that people were processing information, the way that information was presented to them, they decided, we want to push the LGBT movement. We want to push the civil rights movement. We want to push educating the next generation of people to be different. And we, again, have the power to actually make that happen. That is the difference, guys. That there was an incentive to actually change people's minds through the information that they were given, and especially with younger people working with the next generation to make that happen. You can agree or disagree with certain aspects of these movements, but the bottom line is no one wants to do this for men. That's the difference. No one cares about men because men will not support more government. Men will not support, hey, if we change things politically for you, you're going to be part of our ideological coalition now. That's not the case for men. Men will not want the government to come in and tell them how to do things anymore. If you give individual men within the family structure power again, that opposes feminism and this security in order for us to control you way of doing things that women through feminism have largely allowed. In other words, women will vote for more government. Men vote for less government. Who do you think the powers that be are going to support? It's not men. And so things are not going to get better on that front either. And so again, guys, you're not going to go into a community of people that have been taught for generations that abusing animals is okay and get them to join PETA. You're not going to go into greater society and convince people that they need to start caring about men when they've been taught all these bad things about men for generations. Men have oppressed women throughout all of history, and men can't do anything right, but they need to do more for women, even though women don't need men. Women are special, women are equal, women are victims. You men just need to fall in line. Well, now you need to actually start caring about men because in reality, men are half the victims or close to it of domestic violence. Or in reality, men have no reproductive rights. So why should men care about women's right to abortion of convenience being challenged? In reality, men aren't allowed to have gender-based expectations, right? Asking a woman to make you a sandwich is considered at least slightly sexist, but expecting a man to continue to pay child support for kids that turned out to not be his, that's just what a real man ought to do. This is where things stand, guys, and it's ridiculous, but unfortunately, human nature, for the most part, does not allow people to just care about things because the facts support something, or to just care about a movement or an idea because it's the right thing to do. No one cares. Nobody cares about men. That's not going to change unless there is external pressure to basically force the issue and make people start caring about men. And again, by force the issue, I don't mean violence. I don't mean actual force. I mean men using what they have in terms of what they can offer by just not offering those things to society to a large extent anymore. Minimizing what they do for women out there that they don't know, for people that aren't in their core inner circle of people, and stop helping a system that just is built on exploiting them. And again, guys, you can see how the PETA principle plays out in past historical examples. Why do you think it is that slavery has existed in some form for most of human history? As long as they were able to get away with that, and they were taught their whole lives that that was an okay process, they'd support slavery. People today are not really that much different. The only difference is that we have come some ways in terms of moving in the right direction But at the same time, again, that's largely because the powers that be decided that that's what they wanted to support. But they will never support helping men. They will never support undoing feminism. They will always just want men to be providers and protectors for a system that's basically built around taking advantage of them at this point, for little to no actual gain in the long run for those men. They're not going to care about male victims of domestic violence. They're not going to care about men having no reproductive rights. They're not going to care about men being fired based on false accusations with Me Too. They're not going to care about men not having access to their own children. They're not going to care about men being homeless. They're not going to care about men ending themselves. They're only going to care about women because that's what they've been taught to do for generations, and just trying to reach them based on the facts and based on compassion and empathy will not work for the vast majority of people out there, and it's not going to change society. The only way that it can get through to people, and I think it's honestly more likely that society will collapse anyway. In other words, the powers that be will keep doubling down on feminism until it's too late, and women will just continue to think that they deserve more until it's too late. And I've discussed that. Women are not generally as rational as men, and so they're not going to see that they need to change in large enough numbers, and they're just going to continue to blame men for their problems until it all kind of comes down like a house of cards. Not to mention that in the United States we're $37 trillion in debt anyway. So I just don't think there's much hope for Western civilization to make it much longer. But if you really want to change things, if you're die hard on making things better for men in society, that change can only come through external pressure. That change can only come from enough men walking away. That change can only come if men decide that they're not going to play this game anymore. That change will not come, in my opinion, by trying to directly advocate for men's rights and men's issues, because if nobody cares about men, then nobody cares about men, and that's not going to be an avenue for change, because people don't work like that for the most part. People are not going to recognize that, oh, you need to actually start caring about men now because it's the right thing to do. People don't care about the right thing to do for the most part. They go with what they've been taught, and unless enough men walk away from this system, just telling people that they ought to change their minds really isn't going to do anything. And I think that's ultimately why the men's rights movement has failed more than anything else, because that's just not how human nature tends to work, unfortunately.